Hey everyone, Shane here with etrailer.com. Today I have a 2015 Grand Design Reflection fifth wheel. Here in just a few minutes, I'm going to be walking you through how to install a new roof membrane. But I want to go over a few things, maybe how to determine if you need a new roof, or if maybe you just need to replace the sealant. Now, if you don't necessarily have to replace your roof, you haven't found any soft spots, you haven't found any leaks, but you maybe found a tear or two in your roof. There are patch kits here at etrailer that you can get. One thing I will say is if you have a rubber roof, the patch kits, I'm not really excited about them. I don't know if they really work as well as they're supposed to as far as staying down. So if you put one of them on, it could be just a temporary fix. I would suggest if you do put it on, get up and check it once in a while to make sure it's still on there. What I want to do is I want to go up on the roof, kind of walk around a little bit. I'm going to show you what the old membrane looks like, what it kind of looks like now, and why we're replacing it. Hopefully I can help you determine whether you need to replace yours, or maybe you just need to reseal the edges to keep any water from getting underneath that membrane and damaging any of the wood components. This is what our roof looks like now. As you can see, it's pretty wore out. It looks like it hasn't really been maintained very well. When you have the rubber or the synthetic rubber roofs, you have to maintain them. You have to clean them and put a conditioner on them at least once every 2 years. Once a year is probably best. If you don't, you can see this is broke down. It doesn't have a texture to it anymore, which your rubber and synthetic rubber does have a texture. This doesn't have a texture anymore, so it's really broke down to where it's not really giving you a benefit. It's really not helping you anymore. So what happens after it breaks down is it tears really easy. If it tears, you can get a leak. It's not holding out water as good as it used to. What happens is it's going to get underneath here. Your panels, you have wood panels that run across like this. If the water gets on there, you're not going to see it. It's going to cause it to mold. It's going to get soft. I know there's a few soft spots in this roof. I just don't know where they are exactly. We'll know better once we start taking the old stuff off and get down to the wood. Another thing you want to look for is the sealant that runs along all the edges. Anything like around here, around your vents, around your steps if you have stairs coming up the back. Sealant that runs along the outside edges. Anything going to your roof membrane. If you find it's cracked, and it's going to happen, it happens on every single camper, it's inevitable. But you need to look at it. If it's cracked and you allow it to keep going, the crack's going to get bigger and it's going to allow water to seep in underneath all those edges. It could be a small crack. If it's a small crack, you can determine whether you just need to put a little bit of sealant over the top. If it's a very large crack, or maybe the sealant from one end to the other looks pretty bad, maybe a good idea to take all that sealant off and just reseal the whole thing again. Keep in mind, this is your sanctuary away from your home. You want this to stay as nice as possible. You want to save yourself a lot of money. Don't allow it to get damaged on the inside. Again, it's going to cost you a lot of extra if you don't. Before you actually start your installation, you have to prep for it. That means anything that's on top of your roof that you can see are your air conditioners, your vents, your skylight, your antenna. All that stuff has to be removed before you can get the membrane off. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go inside. You're going to have to take off anything that is connecting that part to the inside. Once you get all of that taken off, you can come outside, you can take all this stuff off. Another thing you got to do is all of your trim pieces that run around the outside of the camper, including the top of the nose. You're going to have to take all that trim off. Also your steps that come up the back. You're going to have to take off the screws and disconnect that just at the top of the roof. You don't have to disconnect it all the way down the wall, just on the top of the roof so we can pull our membrane out. And also when we go to put the new one in, we can get back underneath of it. Your slide boxes, those are going to have the same membrane that your roof does. So you want to make sure you check them. What I recommend, highly recommend, is if you don't have a slide topper, put one on. Because if you have to replace that membrane that's on your slide, most likely you're going to have to take the slide box out, because that membrane actually goes inside, stays inside underneath, or inside the wall here. So it can be a little bit difficult to do that. Put a slide topper on, and it'll stay covered. You don't have to worry about it turning out like this. You don't have to worry about cleaning or anything like that. Kind of notice the sticks and stuff that are on there. Any water that gets on it, when you slide your box in, if you don't clean it off, it goes right inside the camper. So now, not only your roof here could be causing damage inside, your slide box as well can be. Just to give you an idea of a couple things that you're gonna have to remove from the inside. As I mentioned earlier, air conditioners, you have to remove the stuff from the inside first. You're gonna have a cover over your air conditioner on the inside, and then underneath that, you're gonna have something similar to this. This necessarily isn't gonna be yours, but you're gonna have a piece like this that separates your return from the air that's blowing into the camper. Just remove the screws from that. You're gonna have wiring in there that is gonna have to be disconnected. So when you get to that portion, make sure you don't have any power connected. Make sure you disconnect all the power from any outside source. And you may even, if you want to take an extra step, turn your main breaker off to the camper. Another example, your vents. You're gonna have a piece that kind of looks like this, a trim piece. And it should just have 4 screws in it. And then, of course, anything that you're gonna need to take out on the inside as far as the vent part here before you can go outside and take the vent off the roof. Skylight, if inside your camper you have something like this, which is just a cover to go over it, I would go ahead and remove that to give you a little bit more room when actually putting on the membrane, because you can see the membrane here, the old membrane. When we put the new one on, we're actually going to bring it down and staple it just like that along this edge. So try to give yourself as much room as possible. And then of course, if you have a crank style antenna like we have here, has a crank with a spring on the inside, and then a cover, of course, we're going to have to take that off so that when we go up top, remove all the screws and stuff, we're able to pull that antenna out from in here. I will say, when you're taking this stuff off, even on the roof, save the screws, because the kit to replace your membrane does not come with new screws. If you are going to replace your screws, you can find those pretty much anywhere. They're a square bit, so you know, look around at a local hardware store or something like that. So we're going to start removing all of our trim pieces along the outside edges. As I mentioned, we're going to have a nose piece. That's this piece here. You'll see 2 screws. The rest of them are going to be underneath this sealant here. We have our gutter, and then if you have this plastic piece in here, a lot of times these can get brittle over time, so they will need to be replaced. I'm going to try to pull it out to where I can save it. Maybe we can clean it up and put new, or clean it up and put it back in, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. Phillips or square bit, you can remove the screws holding it in. And we're going to do this all the way around the camper. Any trim piece that the top is going underneath, you're going to have to remove it to not only take the old stuff off, but put the new stuff on. Once you get all your trim pieces removed, we'll come up on the roof. We'll start removing all the stuff on the top here. Along your vents, you're going to have screws. We're going to take all of them out. I mentioned before, they're most likely square head. You may have to kind of get some of the sealant out of the way. Once we get all of these screws out, we are not going to have to worry about any sealant being on the membrane, because we're going to be taking it off. So what we're going to do is we're just going to cut around the edge. We'll just pull the vent off. And then, of course, once we get it done, we'll have to clean off the old sealant so that when we put them back in place, we'll put new sealant on top. once you get your vents cut out, you can repeat this for any other vents you're removing. And then when it comes to your air conditioners, the only thing different about those is they're held in from the inside. They're not going to have anything bolting them down on the outside, but I will suggest getting a couple of people to help get those down. Once we got all the stuff off the roof, I was kind of going around checking things out for any soft spots that I may need to pay attention to while I'm walking around up here, especially, other than the big holes. I noticed right here, right around this hole, where our second air conditioner was, this is all soft. So what I'm figuring is either the air conditioner was installed too far back and it was allowing water to get under it, the seal was bad, or it wasn't tightened down enough in this corner. If it's not tightened down or the seal's bad, you can see where the water is getting in here, and what it did is it saturated all this wood, basically just like this. And now all this is going to have to come out. It is two separate pieces. This is the seam where the support brace runs across the roof here, or the truss, if you will. And you have two pieces that are connected here. So we're going to have to replace this piece and this piece. And then other than that, once I pull up the rest of the membrane, we'll see if there's any other parts that may have got some water damage, and we may just go ahead and replace those as well. Now we can go ahead and start removing our top. The easiest way that I found to do is to cut it in sections, because as you pull it up, there's an adhesive under this that kind of glues it to the wood, or holds it down, if you will. And if you try to pull this whole thing off in one piece, it's going to be really tough once you get all the way to the other end. So you can either cut sections this way and peel them off, across, or I think what I'm going to maybe do is I might cut it across halfway in the middle and then straight up the center, and then peel it off in 4 different sections. We're going to just start at one corner, one end, and just start pulling it up. Once you get enough of it up, I've done a few different roofs. Each roof is a little bit different when you're pulling the membrane off. This one actually took a little bit longer. I'd say it took about 45 minutes to an hour. It's a good idea to have a second person to help you, because pulling that membrane off where it is actually glued down to the wood can be a little bit tough, and it can get a little bit tiring. So have a second person with you to help you do it. It's going to go a lot quicker then. Next, we need to remove any pieces and replace any wood pieces that may be damaged. I've already have one removed. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to come across underneath. I didn't know if the manufacturer had maybe glued this to the bottom of the panels. So I wanted to be sure. What I found was it was just screwed in right along the edges all the way around, and then you'll have a few that run up the center. So the screws are going to be kind of hard to see all of them. When I was taking this off, I think I missed like 4 or 5 of them here in the center because they were so small. So once you get it removed, remove any of the extra screws that you have sticking up, so that when you go put your new piece down, they're not getting in the way. Also, there's seam tape that runs along the edge here. This tape here, this black tape, and also this tape. This is drywall seam tape. This you're going to need to run along all your seams. This tape, if you have it on there, is going to run from the top over to this side. Now we don't have the black particular stuff that they used here. It's almost like almost feels like a real thin type of tape. But we do have this seam tape from Alpha Systems. This is what we're going to use to replace this once we take this off. Water, it's waterproof. It's made to seal any edges, end caps, stuff like that. And it sticks to, you know, pretty much anything. Wood surfaces, wood paneling, concrete, metal, stuff like that. So this stuff's really good. It's not real thick, so replacing something that thin, you're not going to have to worry about it when you go to put your top on, having an edge that's sticking up higher. Now we got one panel removed. We made sure there wasn't any debris on top of our insulation there. I noticed that some of the wood that was underneath here, the trusses that run across right where this leak was, were a little bit damp. This piece here is just a little piece, but these trusses here, they were a little bit damp still. So what I did is I put a fan on it for a couple hours and kind of let them dry out. And they still seem pretty solid. So, you know, I don't hear any cracking or anything like that. So I don't think the integrity of the wood there is too bad where it's going to have to be replaced. But we do want to make sure it's dry so that once we put the wood, these two panels in place, and then put our new stuff on and then get our all of our stuff put back up here, the cavity inside there is going to be, there's not going to be any airflow in there. If that's damp, it's just going to mold. So make sure that is dry before you start putting anything back in place. When you get to put your panel in, the easiest way to do it, luckily on this end over here behind me, they marked it where the trusses run across here, but they didn't mark it on the other end. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. They have pencil lines here, but when you put the board on, it's going to cover that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a mark here for the center of the truss. So that my board doesn't cover these marks and I know where to put my screws in place. There. So now we'll get our new board put in place and then we can start screwing it down. Now we've got our second board in place, and if you remember, there was a hole here and that was for our air conditioner. This was our spot that was pretty bad on the two boards that ruptured before. What we need to do is we need to cut that out. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can either measure the distance before you put the board on to find the hole and hope that when your marks are right, when you cut it out, or you can do what I'm about to show you and make it a little bit easier on yourself. Now we're inside the camper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a long drill bit. You probably don't need one quite this long, but long enough. And what you can do is get right in the corner, each one of the corners, drill a hole straight up through it, then we'll go up top. We'll use that to mark our square, and then we can cut it out. We'll repeat that for each corner, and again, then we can go up and we can cut it out from the top side. Now all I'm going to do is take a straight line. I'm using a yardstick. We'll go to the outside edge of the holes. Put a line in between all of them. That'll make our square. Then we can come back with a jigsaw and cut them all out. We'll take our blade. Make sure your drill bit's big enough that your blade's going to fit through it. And we're just going to follow the lines. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut straight across, opposite corner, and cut this triangle out because our plug sits right here. I'm going to make sure when I run these two lines that I don't hit that. From here, what we can do is, if we came off our line a little bit, we can go in and clean it up, and we know how close we're going to be away or to the inside edge here without cutting into it. So now we'll just come back and just clean up our edges. Once we got it all cleaned up, we're going to take some drywall seam tape. It'll look like this. We're going to run it where these two pieces come together. And you don't necessarily have to go over the edge, because we're also, once all your edges are cleaned up, you get all the old stuff off, we're going to come back and we're going to retape all of that as well. This stuff does have, it's sort of sticky on one side. Once we get our sealer on here before we put our membrane in place, our adhesive, it will run through that and it'll help seal those two pieces together as well as hold the tape down. So as I mentioned, we're going to do our edges as well. You want to make sure you get off any of the sealer that was on the sides from underneath of your side rails. Once you have that cleaned off, and you can clean it off with a plastic scraping tool, make sure you take out the staples, because we're going to be putting new ones in. So once you have the outside edge of your camper cleaned off, all the extra butyl tape and anything like that, we can come back and we can install our seam tape. I've cut mine in sections like this. It makes it a little bit easier to install rather than trying to hold the roll and go down the whole edge of the camper. One thing we got to keep in mind is, because we are putting this from the top to this outside edge, when we go to put our new membrane on, our membrane has to stick to something on this side, and then we'll pop a staple in it. This being fleece, the butyl tape will not stick to this. So we have to make sure we stay high enough that when we put the butyl tape on, it actually sticks to the side, but still goes over top of the edge of the fleece, if that makes sense. And we'll show you that here in just a minute. So we're going to take our tape and we'll just peel off like this. Make sure your area is clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay up towards the top edge a little bit. And I might be down maybe ½ inch to an inch down. Probably closer to half, I would say. And we're just going to go down the side and stick the tape on. It can be a little trying until you get started with it. We're going to take this and roll up on top like that. Just work your way from one end to the other. Just kind of press it into place. We're going to do that from one end to the other on both sides of the camper, or anywhere you need to cover up a seam. Once you get your seams covered up, just along this outside edge, as I mentioned, we're going to have to put butyl tape on this outside, so when we put our new membrane on and we pull it over, to kind of stretch it over to keep it tight, we can stick it right to the butyl tape, pop a staple in it, and that will hold it in place and keep our membrane from kind of bunching up into the center. Once you have all your seam tape in place, then we're going to come back and we're going to put the butyl tape on. The first line of butyl tape, we need to take and get it up to the top edge of this panel. So right up here. is where we're going to place it, or place the edge. We're not going to peel off the tape or the paper yet. Not until we get our top up, we get our sealant on top, we at least get the top of it rolled out, and then we can come back and we can roll the flap up, pull this off, pull our top down, kind of stretch it, stick it to it, pop a staple in it. That'll keep it taut. We want to make sure we do this around any of the edges that require butyl tape. Most of the time, it is going to be this side and the opposite side, driver and passenger side of the camper. On some, it will also be done in the back as well, depending on what type of trim piece you have back there. For this camper, it does not have it. We're only putting it on the two sides here, underneath our new material. Once you have everything cleaned off, you have your butyl tape and seam tape on your outsides. We're going to start installing the membrane. It's going to take a couple ladders to lift this up. You're going to make sure that the textured side is facing up and the slick side is facing down towards your wood. You want to make sure that it's centered. You get this even same amount hanging off both sides, and then it's not twisted. I'm going by the seam between the two pieces of wood here to kind of line it up to make sure that I'm centered. This seam right here to make sure that it's centered. Even if it's off just a little bit, it'll be okay. You just don't want it really twisted, because by the time you get up to the other end, you're not going to have enough overhang on one side. Next thing you're going to need is you're going to need to grab your acrylic water-based sealant. A large paint roller, a small paint roller. I'm going to use just a sponge, and a pan. What we're going to do is we're going to do like a 4-foot section at a time. So I'm basically going to do from our seam here to this line across. We're going to roll it on there, and we're going to take this and roll it over the top. We're going to take this roller, start in the center, and we're going to roll the bubbles out to the edges. Be a good idea if you had a second person to help do this, because as we start pushing up towards the front of the camper, there may be a few times where you're going to have to kind of pick this up to tighten the fabric or tighten the material before you can set it back down. It's going to be kind of hard if you're on one side doing it, trying to pick it up with one hand to tighten it up and then keep rolling. It also goes a lot quicker if you have a second person that can run the roller and spreading this as you're pushing and pushing out the bubbles. Keep in mind, before you start laying anything out, you have enough overhang on the back side so that it comes down past where any of your trim pieces are going to be. You can come back once you put your trim on. We can trim all of this material off right underneath of it, because we want this cover to seal all the way along the sides and along the front and back. So what I did is I rolled a bit of it out. I don't have any sealant back here, but it gives me something to lean on or to be on. I'm not sticking to any of this board. I did take my shoes off. That's completely up to you. Only reason I did is because I've been walking on this roof for a couple of days, and my shoes got a lot of crap on them from the old glue. So your sealant or your adhesive, take something and mix it up a little bit, especially if it's been sitting in a warehouse for a little while. Grab your paint roller, put a little bit in there, and then we're going to start rolling it from one side to the other. And you can kind of see how it's a milky. You want to make sure that it looks like that. And when we get out to our edges, you want to make sure you go over that seam tape. Don't just get to the seam tape and then stop. And you don't have to worry about, you know, going from one side to the other and that drying too quick. You have plenty of time to take your time with it and get the stuff spread out. So we'll get up to a certain spot here. That's something to kind of stop it. And then we'll just start rolling everything out. Out toward the edges. Now what you're going to do is you're just going to keep working your way forward all the way till till you get to your first pipe that may be sticking up out of the camper. Once we get there, I'll show you what to do next. This is the pipe I was talking about, so it might be a good idea to have a couple people on ladders on each end. What they're going to do is they're going to lift it, and they're going to come right over to the opposite side of it, just where there's enough pressure where you can see it. And we're going to start by cutting a small triangle or an X in it. Push it down like that. You're going to repeat the same thing for any other pipes you may have sticking up. So now that our membrane is in place, I did let it sit over the weekend because it seemed like it was pretty damp and moving around quite a bit. Now that it's fairly dry and it's kind of stuck in place, what I'm going to do is we need to cut all of our holes out for our air conditioners, vents, skylights, stuff like that. So for a square hole like this, which is where one of our vent was, we're going to find a corner. Actually, we'll find two corners. We got one here and one here. We're going to take a utility knife and we're going to cut from one side to the other. And then same thing like this. Once you get the triangles cut, what we're going to do is we're going to fold it down tight. The best thing to use is an air stapler if you have one. We're going to fold it down in here tight, and we're going to put a couple staples in to make sure that it stays there. And we're going to do this all the way around. You're going to repeat that for any opening for anything that goes on top of your roof, including your air conditioners. Once we get that stapled down, we need to reinstall our vent. You want to make sure you clean off any of the old sealant. So you can see on the top, I've cleaned everything off. The bottom, I've cleaned everything off. We're going to be putting new butyl tape that comes in the kit on the bottom side. We want to make sure you cover the screw holes. Once you get that on, you want to make sure that the hinge part of the vent is facing the front of the camper. So that way when you're driving down the road, the lid doesn't get pulled up by the air flow. Try to line this up as close as possible. Kind of push it in place. And then we'll take screws that we removed when we were taking everything apart and reinstall them. Once you have your top sealed up, we're going to move to the sides. As I mentioned before, we need to make sure we clean off any of the old butyl tape or sealant that was on here. Then we're going to come back, we're going to put new butyl tape along the very top line. Once we get that on, we'll peel off the top paper we're going to take our top, we're going to pull it down like this. We're going to use the same stapler that we used when we did the vent holes and air conditioner holes on the top side. We're going to pull this down tight. Make sure we're not stretching this, but we want to pull it down tight. We'll kind of stick it against the butyl tape. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a few staples in underneath of it. We're going to do this from one end to the other. And all this is doing is ensuring that the top stays tight and taut right along this edge right here. Once you have your staples in all the way down to the end, might be a good idea to take something sharp, pick like this, kind of lift it up and find the factory holes that were in there, and then take the pick and just kind of poke a hole in it. I did a couple of them. It kind of gives me an idea. Once we get a few of them in there, the rest of them should line up directly. Might be a good idea if you have a second set of hands to hold the end of this while you put those screws in. You want to make sure you put butyl tape on the back side where your screw holes are, so that when you drive the screw in, it's going to grab some of that and it's going to pull it into the hole and help seal it. It doesn't really matter if you start in the front or the back, but again, make sure you're grabbing the correct one. As I mentioned way earlier when we were taking these off, mark each one as you're taking them off so you know where they go. We're not going to put the very end one in because we have to put a gutter back here, so I'm going to start on the second one. I'll grab a screw, I'll line it up with that hole, and we can drive it in. We're just going to work our way down. Once we get a few of them in, as I said, the rest of them should line up. We'll go ahead and get our gutter installed. It's going to go back behind our trim piece. You can see the factory hole in it. We'll just get those lined up like that. And then we'll run a screw through it. Once you get one end done, you're just going to follow the same procedure with your trim pieces and then your gutter at the other end. Once you have all your trim on from one end to the other, we're going to come back and we need to trim off this excess. We're going to take a utility knife. We're going to right up against this bottom edge. Down to the end. What we don't want to do is we don't want to foul this line up and over. What we're going to have to do is we're going to cut this straight out, and on our back side we're going to cut it straight, and then we're going to fold this over and staple this right on this back corner. And this corner piece is going to fit over the top to cover it. And then we can come back and seal it all. You just want to make sure when you're trimming this corner, you take your time with it. It's better to leave more than you need and be able to come back and trim it than to cut off too much and not be able to put it back on. So now we'll take our stapler, we're going to fold it like this, and we're going to throw a couple staples right here in this corner to hold it down. Now we'll take our corner piece, we'll get it set in place, screw it down opposite of the way you took it off. I have a couple here on the very back that we need to put in. Next, we're going to come back with non-sag sealant. We're going to seal the top edge of our rails down to the corner, this edge around this side, the back edge here, and then the bottom side of this top rail on the back. You also want to make sure you get right here on this edge of this gutter, right on this edge, and come up, you know, a couple inches here, and then around this bottom edge. We just want to make sure we seal it as good as possible so we don't have any water that gets in. The way we do the top of this, we're going to cut a small cut Cut just a little bit of the tip off. We're going to put a small bead here. Take a wet cloth, a little bit better than a paper towel. Get it wet and wet the end of your finger. And all you're going to do is you're going to take your finger, and you don't want to push. You just want to run it across there. You're going to do that from one end to the other on top of your rail. Once you have all your trim pieces put back on, you've sealed everything, go ahead and install the little trim piece that goes over top of your screws for your trim. Then you can go inside and install any of the components for your air conditioners, your vents, anything like that. You're ready to go. It's going to do it for a look at and installation of the Alpha Systems Superflex roof membrane on a 2015 Grand Design reflection fifth wheel.